Sure. Yeah, it's like, get better from here. We're good? Okay. So our agenda is an overview of OTA, a little bit about Indians and tribes. We're going to talk about CDSS tribal consultation policy, our CDSS tribal engagement strategy, and a little bit about our ICWA Specialist Training Pilot Program. So we'll just get right to it. Oh, here we go again. It's not advancing, Julian, sorry. There we go. Okay, so we'll start with an overview of the Office of Tribal Affairs. So we've been around about 2 years here at CDSS. Here's our current team. We're adding to it. We're going to have 3 additional ICWA specialist field position so they're going to be out in the field. They'll be dispersed in Humboldt County here in Sacramento, and then a person in San Diego. But here in the office, there's Heather Hostler, who's our director, Kevin Neidick, who's another analyst, myself, and Mary Risling as the CDSS tribal consultant. So the Office of Tribal Affairs has our vision is to cultivate informed participation and trusting relationships with and among tribes, CDSS, and counties to enhance the well-being of Indian children and families. And our mission really is grounded in meaningful tribal consultation. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about what that looks like. Engagement of core stakeholders, advising leadership here at CDSS. The OTA guides CDSS's efforts to help create and facilitate policies and procedures and program development that serve American Indian children and families. And our values are respect for tribal sovereignty, integrity, transparency, and we are solution focused. So we at the Office of Tribal Affairs have the primary responsibility of facilitating better government-to-government relationships between CDSS and the tribes within the state of California. We also have the primary responsibility of implementing the tribal consultation policy. And we serve to advise CDSS leadership, like we talked about, throughout the department. So not just child welfare, but all the other programs that exist here, in concert with branches and bureaus. So this is a little bit about integrating the work, the tribal work. It exists throughout the department, and tribal consultation and the policy is designed to be early and often with working with tribes. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the components of the tribal consultation policy. But we work in collaboration to provide trainings and technical assistance. And we're developing an approach that I talked a little bit about. We're adding to our team with the ICWA field specialists. That's okay. No problem. Hopefully the folks on the line caught that. Okay, good. Okay, let's see. Okay, so integrating the tribal work throughout CDSS. It starts, like we had talked about, with tribal consultation, right, and tribal engagement. We have an advisory capacity, so we're the Office of Tribal Affairs is here as a resource for all of the programs and to help with program development, outreach, like targeted outreach, policy development, and the like. We talked about a little bit about developing the ICWA field positions, the idea being that they would be out in the field helping to improve relationships between tribes and counties where implementation of ICWA happens right on the ground. So, and they would be connected here to this office and the policy shops. So we're building out a program that will help improve the implementation, the consistent implementation of ICWA across all the 58 counties and the 109 tribes within the state. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Thank you for coming. Spread the word. So one of the purposes in the vision statement that one of our visions that Jennifer mentioned is cultivating informed participation and trusting relationships. And bottom line is to have trusting relationships, you really have to know something about who you are in relationship with. And it's kind of hard to do that with tribes when you don't know what a tribe is or how they operate or what the tribal landscape looks like. And so really that's part of what the Office of Tribal Affairs is attempting to facilitate, both with the work that it's doing internally here at the department, but also with the field positions that will be deployed to work more closely and on an applied basis with different regions throughout the state. So that said, we've had some handouts which will be attached or sent out to the folks that have registered for those on webinar. And one of them is called Historic and Contemporary Tribal Sovereigns. And it has, oh, I guess I need to, it has these maps, these beautiful colored map, which is like when contact occurred, the Americas were fully occupied by tribal nations. And in California, those colored lines represent what those tribal areas look like. Over hundreds of years of interaction and the actions of the federal legal system that kind of umpire the relationship of tribes and states and the United States. The little dots are where the casinos are. That's kind of where we are today. And so part of that, but both are relevant. So we had done these last year as part of the Native American Heritage Month, both the contemporary and historic tribal sovereigns, and then a second one, which is separate sovereigns, which really is designed to highlight that tribes, that federally recognized tribes are governments, and they are sovereign governments, as are the 50 states and as is the United States. And what we learned from this is nobody understands this stuff. So from there, we actually have progressed to working with CDSS branches to begin to articulate what we're calling basic competencies. And that's kind of to lay the groundwork for any engagement with tribes. What do you need to know, no matter where you are in CDSS, whether it's emergency response or whether it's child welfare or housing or fiscal or wherever, you kind of need to know what tribes are. So that's your overview of tribes, except I will say that, oops, what happened here? Okay, yeah, what is a federally recognized tribe? So since we're focusing on consultation, well, I want you to have the beautiful colored map in your mind as well, because, you know, on the backside of the historic and contemporary sovereigns is something called tribal lanes. And really what that's meant to communicate is that these concepts interact with each other and they continue to be valid today. Generally, when I introduce myself, I say, I am Hupa, Yurok, and Karuk, 3 separate federally recognized tribes, and an enrolled member of the Hupa Valley tribe, because I am a citizen in the contemporary approach to Indian law of the Hupa Valley tribal nation. But I actually am a member in terms of cultural affiliation with all 3 of those tribes who continue to operate traditional systems. So these things interact with each other, and understanding that and that they are relevant, it's not real simple, but becoming acquainted with that and understanding that and is the foundation of a trusting relationship. So a federally recognized tribe, and you see it's a group of Indians, band, nation, other organized group or community recognized as eligible for services provided to Indians by the Secretary of Interior. What that translates to today for us is the Bureau of Indian Affairs annually publishes a list of federally recognized tribes. And you can go to their website and they have a tribal leaders directory, and you can see who all the little dots are and who their elected officials are. And those are the folks that are generally considered to have a sovereign government to government relationship with states and the United States. So, and those are the folks that generally we have mandates in the Department of Social Services to consult with, both as a function of executive order, but also federal regulations. So generally, historically, tribes were recognized through treaty, acts of Congress, executive orders, and federal administrative actions or federal court rulings. And that kind of helps to explain how you could, for example, have the Wilton Rancheria, which was recognized as a tribe. It's in the only tribe in Sacramento, ceased to exist as a tribe because as a function of federal law, its status was terminated. Got unrecognized through court decisions because some things were done wrong when they tried to accomplish that, and now has land in trust in Elk Grove and is slated to build a beautiful casino hotel complex. And my newest little granddaughters are enrolled members of the Wilton Rancheria. But, you know, people think, okay, this is like you're here when Columbus came, but really their untermination occurred in the 90s. So they've really only been back on that list for a couple of years. 2 years ago, Donald Trump recognized 5 new, they're not new, but 5 Virginia tribes that had been state recognized since the original states existed. And now they're new on the books. And we have to figure out how to get them into our data systems and add them and all of that. So there's a lot of history, a lot of variation that occurs, but historically that's kind of how you got on the list. And current recognition process, BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, administers that through regulations. And California does not have state recognized tribes. So we hear a lot about the spirit of ICWA, for example, but really all that is it's not just all, but what that is an authorization in the Welfare and Institutions Code for a non-federally recognized tribe with the permission of the court to participate in a case involving one of their children. And that's a function of the beautiful colored map versus the tiny little dots that exist, because oftentimes there were larger groups of, for example, Miwok Indians, which is what the Sacramento affiliated tribes historically would identify as. And then as a function of history, they end up with residents of small land areas that were purchased for Indians, and then through other statutes administered and given the opportunity to organize as a tribe. So you get 30 people as a sovereign nation and 200 not Indians anymore. So that's kind of that spirit of ICWA stuff. So if you're federally recognized, the legal framework acknowledges all of these powers. So these have all been clarified through statutes and cases: powers to select your own form of government, to make and enforce laws, define and regulate use of your territory, to determine membership, to regulate trade with your borders, to impose and collect taxes, to regulate domestic relations, and to regulate property. So it's these governmental powers. I see a number of people who are engaged with placement issues and approvals and licensing of homes. And this is government stuff. This is jurisdictional interactions of tribes. So, you know, that kind of starts with really understanding this business of federally recognized tribes and membership or citizenship in those recognized tribal groups. So in addition to federally recognized tribe, modern tribal communities are very diverse. There are urban, we have the largest population of Indians in California, the largest in California of any state in the nation. And the urban areas by far have the largest numbers of Indian people. And the vast majority of those are Indians from tribes that are located outside of California. There are 109 tribes in California with reservation areas. We have Indian health clinics operating throughout the state. Ceremonies, traditional ceremonies that continue to occur. Traditional practices that appear in all of these configurations, and folks are community rooted, both in reservation communities, but also in urban areas where through government initiatives that intentionally moved Indian people from around the country to urban areas, those folks kind of gathered together into communities. So it's very identifiable. And the point I would like to make with this is simply that formal consultation, as required, is with federally recognized tribes in the state. So that's the 109 California tribes. But all the tribes in the nation and all of these different communities are ICWA and tribal stakeholders. Okay, so separate sovereign. Sovereignty is a nation or state's supreme power within its borders. It's inherent, comes from within the group, and it is not delegated. In the US constitutional framework, there are 3 types of domestic sovereigns: the United States, 50 states, and 573 federally recognized Indian tribes. So when folks start dealing with tribal issues, it seems kind of complicated, but I think all of you are used to dealing with 58 counties, and you know how challenging that can be. Now add 50 states and 573 tribes, and it's going to be something that you have to understand a path to work your way through. And it's not going to be one size fits all. But really the point here, because we often hear it said that tribes are like counties. In some respects, yes, as when they negotiate for a Title IV-E agreement with the state to operate a 4E program like a county does, pursuant to the state plan, then they're like a county, but otherwise they're like a state. And that's something that, you know, people are not used to thinking about. Well, relationship between tribes and states, generally states have no authority over tribal governments unless expressly authorized by Congress. And that's over tribal governments and tribal territory, so within reservations. But in California, there's a statute that's generally known as Public Law 280 that grants California criminal and some civil jurisdiction in Indian country. That's why on reservations in California, CDSS is in there, regulating child welfare, domestic relations, but it's not necessarily to the exclusion of tribes. So you start getting into the government talk, the jurisdiction talk, and tribes can have concurrent or shared jurisdiction with the state of California. But if they're not exercising that jurisdiction, the responsibility is with the state. So that gets confusing. People try to be humble and differential to tribes, and they'll start talking about, well, best practice is to not enter the reservation without tribal permission. It's like, well, guess what? If there's a child being abused and you don't enter the reservation, you're going to have some potential liability to that child if you have jurisdiction. So, you know, understanding these concepts, becoming aware of them, and then building them into your approaches to programs and policies is really an important step in achieving compliance with the federal laws that apply to Indians and tribes. So while So federally recognized tribes, have the authority to regulate their territory and their members. And while they're not subordinate to states, tribes can have government-to-government relationships with states and can enter into agreements. So very high level, the lay of the tribal landscape, 573 federally recognized American Indian Alaska Native villages. So these are the federally recognized tribes that are sovereign. The 2010 census said 5.2 million American Indian, Alaska Native alone or in combination with some other race. And in California, 109 federally recognized tribes, 20% of all the tribes in the nation. 104 have land bases or territory, are based in California, and an additional 5 have territory that extends into California. And that's why we say there's 109 in California. Non-federally recognized tribes, this says 70 plus, have submitted statements of intent to petition for recognition. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs used to use that as their number. And then 2 years ago, they changed their regulations and said, no, to be a non-federally recognized tribe, you need to have a completed petition for recognition. And that took the number to 3. So when we're talking about these numbers, it's operating in a framework, and things change as the players in that framework modify their approach. So a lot of what the Office of Tribal Affairs is doing in terms of basic approaches and competencies is really trying to lay out that framework so people can understand that and begin to get acquainted with how to work within it and how to, as you get additional training and additional knowledge, where to plug it in so you know how it fits together. So the California Native American Heritage Commission maintains a list of 40 plus non-federally recognized tribes for natural resource purposes. And California has health and safety code, or no, it's natural resource provisions that require for development consultation with tribes, including non-federally recognized tribes on that list, for developments, building in California. And it has to do with graves and repatriation of traditional items that are disturbed in construction. And then WIC 224.4 is that provision that allows permissive participation at the discretion of the court. And again, that is a function of the unique history of California and understanding that there's an awful lot of Indians that weren't living on one of these tiny little dots at the time the Bureau organized that tiny little dot, but they are Indian people. And so there are accommodations for that population. Back over to Jennifer.
Thanks. So we're just going to spend a few minutes talking high level about CDSS's tribal consultation policy. The policy was developed over several years with the assistance of a nominated tribal consultation policy committee, and it's in line with the tribal consultation policy of our parent agency. It honors sovereignty of the federally recognized tribes in California, so the 109, and it defines consultation as formal process of government-to-government communication with tribes on significant issues impacting tribes and Indians in California. It applies to all divisions across CDSS. We had kind of talked about that, so it's not just related to ICWA. It's every program within CDSS. It's committed to a participatory process beginning at the earliest possible phases of policy and program development. And we are in OTA helping to develop approaches and guidance that help program and policy people better engage with tribes on specific issues and in targeted ways so that we get the right people to come to to the table to help inform your program development. We acknowledge that there are challenges in balancing the formality and early and ongoing engagement. So the policy dictates a certain timeframes for notice of these issues for tribal consultation, and it has timeframes for tribes to respond. And all of that doesn't really lend itself to being nimble and, you know, engaging early on. So we're looking at ways that we can, you know, kind of CQI the whole tribal consultation and engagement. The policy is currently out for tribal comment. And so if you guys have thoughts about it and you have any valuable feedback in your experience of having to implement it, or in just tribal engagement in general that you've come across, we'd love to hear about it. You can read the policy as it exists and is approved right now. It's on the website until it's taken down because it may not meet the accessibility requirements, but it's there for now. And there'll be a link in the PowerPoint for you to visit it, but know that it is out for comment, and we are looking at areas where we can build into it some areas that are required by certain programs to annually consult. So that'll be made part of the policy so that it, you know, it's institutionalized. And we're also looking at how, you know, some ideas for how to balance that early and often. And let's see here, it's in line with Executive Order B-1011. So if you want to read it, and if you have any input, you can email the Office of Tribal Affairs. It'll be at the end of this presentation. We'd love to hear about any of your experiences to help inform improving it. So we'll spend a minute talking about the Office of Tribal Affairs and CDSS, their tribal engagement strategy. It includes, at the top of the strategy is really about tribal consultation policy. And we've already kind of talked about that a little bit, but it really is the bedrock from which we develop any sort of approaches in the Office of Tribal Affairs. It's focused on high level and respectful institutionalized communication between CDSS leadership and tribal leadership. We also have a tribal advisory committee, and I'm going to show you what the format of that looks like and share our upcoming meeting on November 15th if you're interested. It's open to all CDSS people. We also have a tribal stakeholder review process, so we maintain a list, and right now it's only for CFSD, and it is meant to notice folks that have experience, any sort of ACL or ACIN that goes out for stakeholder review in that 10-day period. We maintain a list of folks that are that have expertise in the area and can review and respond to that. We are looking to do the same thing in other areas. We have an all tribal leader letter, which is yet to be rolled out, but the idea is that it's a high level summary of an issue that speaks directly to tribal leaders, and it's like a bulleted executive summary is basically what it is, so that, you know, maybe you have a 10-page ACL and they want to know the high level 1-page back and front, you know, what do I need to care about? Why does this impact tribes? We have OTA communications, which include email noticing. We have a web page that has links to valuable resources. We have a bulletin, which will share how you can sign up for that newsletter. And then we will be having annual reports coming soon. Okay, so the makeup of the CDSS Tribal Advisory Committee includes these areas of stakeholders and tribal leaders. So we have 13 seats that are reserved, that are voting seats that are reserved for tribal leaders and representatives from regional tribal chairmen's associations. And then we invite high-level people from CDSS, so our branch chiefs. And the director of CDSS is always present at these tribal advisory committee meetings. As the tribal liaison, that establishes that government to government high level meeting. And it's a really good meeting to bring forth, if you have a program that you're trying to, maybe it's a grant opportunity or it's a program that you're seeking tribal input for, you can come do a high level overview and recruit for either work groups or somebody to serve on an existing work group. The next meeting is November 15th. It'll be held out in Natomas. We did that for the tribal, the second annual Tribal Consultation Summit, and because there's free parking, the tribal leaders really appreciated that, so we're moving that out there. And there'll be a registration link if you're interested in attending. It's open to everybody. And like I said, we put out an OTA bulletin. If you have things that you'd like us to share with our tribal listservs, you can send it to the Office of Tribal Affairs and we'll forward that out. We've helped the homeless, the housing folks do outreach so that they can kind of better get some tribal input and get to the right people for their program development. So that's the kind of targeted outreach that we help identify the right people who are within the tribes and tribal programs that might bring that kind of knowledge about how to better engage, how to make sure that you have the right voices at the table in the development. So if you have, if you have anything to share that you'd like us to push out, you just send it forward and let us know, if there are links, include that. And well, let's see, thanks. I think that's, I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Okay, just a few more slides. Humility and ICWA eligible. That was kind of, those were the buzzwords. And then you say, okay, ICWA eligible is kind of is kind of what they're talking about when they say political status, but it really isn't adequate to allow the hotline worker to screen for exclusive tribal jurisdiction when they get that call in the very first instance to start inquiry. You have to kind of know some other pieces of it. And so just even looking at this one statute, you can look at it and say, It's multifaceted, very powerful statute. It has sections that deal with tribal rights and opportunities. This statute says that states and the federal government have to give full faith and credit to the official acts of an Indian tribe. That's like kind of a big deal. And that has nothing to do with minimum federal standards. It says you can reassume tribe exclusive jurisdiction over child welfare if you choose to. That's not necessarily have anything to do with the state court case. So there are some pretty significant provisions in the act that really just address what the authorities of an Indian tribe are. Then there are the minimum federal standards for state court proceedings, and those are a big deal, and they are challenging, and they completely warrant all of the attention that they have been given to date. But that's really only one part of it. And then there are Indian social and cultural considerations. When you have to provide culturally appropriate services to my grandchild, who might be enrolled in the Hoopa Valley tribe, but is Hoopa, Yurok, and Karuk, what's that look like, culturally appropriate services? Well, you kind of need to know what all of those things mean and the interaction between the beautiful colors and the little dots on those maps. So those considerations are very much still relevant. And so I sort of separate them out, saying all of this matters, and be aware of all of them, because they're going to work a little differently in terms of a path as you move forward through the requirements. Oops. So we're not really going to spend time on this. This is just a slide that shows what the minimum federal standards are for state court proceedings. And they're significant. Inquiry in all cases, every case, Indian or non-Indian, beginning at initial contact. And then new duties of due diligence to engage with tribes, and not simply at the court, not just at detention anymore, but beginning at initial contact. Intervention rights for tribes, active efforts for services beginning at initial contact, different evidentiary burdens, placement preferences for foster care and adoptive placements. You can invalidate a case years down the road for violation of these standards. And then if there is a higher state or federal standard, that higher standard applies. And this is California, so we actually have some higher standards. So in terms of the ICWA specialists, as we've discussed, tribes and Indian children and families are among statutorily identified partners, stakeholders, and clients of CDSS. So in addition to the executive order, ACF statutes and regulations require consultation with tribes in your state for measures to comply with ICWA. So that's something that federal law imposes specifically. FEED has some specific consultation requirements as well. So really, we consult on significant actions that impact Indians or tribes. And because Indians are citizens of the state of California, everything impacts Indians and may have tribal implications. So I just had the opportunity to participate in a initial stakeholder session on FERS, the family urgent response systems, where you have to, if you have an insecure placement, we have to roll out a hotline for people to call and be talked off the ledge. And then counties have to have plans, and we have to have teams, 24/7 teams that can go out and meet with the family to try to stabilize that placement and address needs. So I go to this and say, gee, you know what? In urban areas, oftentimes the largest population, the largest employer are tribes. The largest service providers are tribes. They're not here. Where are the tribes? How do we engage with 109, with urban areas? And that's what Jennifer's saying, is we're pondering, how do you achieve meaningful interaction from initial, when you're just starting, all the way through? And that's a work in progress. But I think with any of your programs, you can think about that. It's not just, does it say Indian or tribe? It's emergency funding for RFAs. I'm a tribally approved home and had some children placed with me. And I thought, well, wait a minute, these kids didn't get any emergency funding. TAWs want emergency funding too. So some of it is thinking about how does it impact Indians and tribes? And if it doesn't say Indian or tribe, should it say Indian or tribe? And what does that look like? So it really is that idea of equipping folks with some basic knowledge so that you can assess, is this something we should be thinking about consulting on? Is this, how do we move forward on this? And the Office of Tribal Affairs is really here to assist with that. But then with the ICWA specialist, the idea is equip people with some basic competencies, understanding who and what Indians and tribes are, and then allow them to build on that so that instead of trying to have an ICWA unit that's specialized in this, because to be specialized, you would have to know everything about child welfare and apply it to Indians. And that's a heavier lift than everybody knowing everything about child welfare, learning some things about Indians and tribes and being able to apply that as they do their regular work. So the role of the ICWA specialist is that what we started with is one per CFSD division, and it was just like pick somebody and send them to a meeting, and we're just going to start. And so what we did was develop an initial basic competencies training. We've gone through the first cohort, gotten good feedback on that so far. And generally it does involve basic competency training, engaging with some of the other training opportunities on ICWA and tribes that CDSS provides. We're hoping to develop a visit to Indian country in collaboration with the local tribes so that you actually can go meet, talk with people, see tribal programs in actions. And then the specialist would really be a point of contact to build out what's happening within their branch. And then eventually it affects all of the divisions in CDSS. So it's something that could be built out further. I think it's you.
Well, there's a little more to that, but let's see.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, well, you talked about that. Okay, so we, as Mary talked about, we did the first cohort, all 3 sessions, and then we are doing a makeup session, but it's open to everybody here at CDSS. If you know people that would benefit from this or have interest in really diving into the details of some of these areas that we've kind of really just overviewed in terms of what is a tribe, and a little bit about ICWA. There's a session on ICWA, some history and that kind of thing. So it's been designed to basically be delivered between 9 and 4, and we're doing them by session, so you can register and attend just the sessions that you're interested in. And we'll have a flyer and a registration link that'll go out to everybody who registered for this today, in case you have interest or you have staff that maybe would be interested in taking this, the 3 training sessions all at once in one day. Okay. This is really 4 takeaways. I don't know how we missed, we added another one last minute. Okay, so really we want you to leave here recognizing the unique status of Indians and tribes, tribes as governments that we are mandated to consult with, and that Indian and tribal stakeholders are impacted by all of the programs here at CDSS. And so in developing or in doing the work that you do day to day, keeping that in mind and thinking about, should I consider tribes here? Should I talk to OTA and see if we can offer any sort of assistance in your efforts? And then OTA is really a resource to help you better engage with tribes and tribal stakeholders. And then we just want to thank you for your time and see if you have any questions for Mary or myself.
All right.
Very nice.
Okay. Oops.
Thank you. I wanted to know, is your office reviewing all legislation to kind of raise a flag when you feel that there's a piece of legislation being proposed that you feel you're identifying as a link with the tribes? Or is
No.
that kind of dependent on programs, or is there an expectation that legal will help do that? I'm finding there's kind of a little of a gap that might be apparent.
I can say that Wanda from legal has been sitting in on the pilot that we did, and she said she's been encouraging everybody from legal to go to the full day to get that more detailed familiarity with what Indian law is and what Indians and tribes are. Generally, program people or legal or ledge or stakeholders identify a concern that raises presence of Indians or tribes. And then we generally get some kind of a contact, some kind of reach out. But we do not routinely review everything. What happens, like I actually this is my 5th year and I'll be retiring next year. Yay. Anyway, but I've been kind of doing that role. One of the additional positions, aside from the 3 regional positions, is a legal position. And I think that there is recognition that there is quite a bit of work to do in terms of those types of reviews and to make that a more regular part of the process. So when that person comes on, I think there would be coaching that would occur. But at least initially, because to review and spot those issues oftentimes takes some familiarity, not only with Indians and tribes, but also with child welfare or whatever the area of law is that's the subject of the legislation. That's a pretty tall order. And that's kind of why actually it was Greg Rose, the deputy director, who conceptualized the idea of the ICWA specialists and trying to really infuse some basic competencies throughout the department to do that spotting, so that it isn't dependent upon particular expertise in a particular office, but you could then reach out and do stakeholder engagement to start filling in some of that information.
So if I heard correctly, I think you mentioned that within CFSD, you're looking at like various branches to pick folks out who are going to be kind of like the tribal specialists, get certified, have like a certificate. Mm-hmm. When do you anticipate that expanding out to other divisions throughout CDSS? And how do you envision that kind of like training program to kind of expand?
I think that we just started. Heather said, let's start at the branch level, and she communicated a request to the branch chiefs to designate someone, and I think some of them were just interested or voluntold or whatever. And so we had people and we said, let's just start. But we appreciate that there will be a need to build that out from within each branch, because most of the identified folks are analysts. And if you're an analyst in a particular unit, how do you interact with your entire branch? And so there will need to be some conversations about that. So we are actually, with the assistance of the existing identified folks, saying, let's work through this and figure out what are the challenges in the issues and how might we come up with some approach that would make this workable. So we're doing the all day, so nobody has to wait. You can get a certificate that you've completed the all day, the basic training, because really it's appropriate for everyone to have a foundation. with this. And then Greg also really likes adult learning, so we are trying to integrate, opportunities for folks to work together to really have a chance to grab onto some of these concepts. So we're starting there, and that's the formalized training. And then CDSS has contracts with the Judicial Council, with the National Indian Justice Center to do training. And then also there's other trainings that occur from other providers. So part of it is notifying people of those opportunities and allow them to participate in them and allow them to keep building their knowledge. So some of that is, it's a work allocation issue, which is everybody should be an ICWA specialist, but how much time really does each branch want to allow every employee to spend all their time becoming ICWA specialists? I mean, so you have to, it's a striking the balance. So we're just moving forward, and we don't have a particular plan for that, but folks who are interested can engage at any time. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming again. All the materials will be posted on our DSS source page under CDS Exchange. And if you or your unit or anybody you know that are interested in showcasing your work, please contact the Enterprise Bureau and we'll get you scheduled. Thanks.